Imagine this, you spend a weekend cleaning out an old cabin. Maybe it's a family property that's been sitting empty for a few months. You sweep out some dust, move some boxes. Maybe notice a few old droppings in the corner. You think nothing of it. You feel fine. You drive home. 3 days later, you have a mild headache. You feel a little tired, maybe a slight fever. You take some paracetamol, drink water, and go to bed. By day 5, you can barely breathe. Your lungs are filling with fluid. You're rushed to the emergency room. Doctors are confused because your symptoms look like a dozen different things, until they run one specific test, and that test comes back positive for hantavirus. Here's the terrifying part. You had no idea you were ever exposed, and the moment you first felt symptoms, the virus had already been silently multiplying inside you for weeks. This is the story of why most people completely miss the first signs of hantavirus, and why that mistake can be fatal. Hantavirus is one of those diseases that lives in the shadows. It doesn't make front-page news the way influenza does. It doesn't trend on social media like COVID did, but it's been quietly killing people for decades. And the reason it keeps catching victims off guard comes down to something very human: our brain's refusal to take mild discomfort seriously. Think about how you feel on a normal Tuesday when you wake up with a slight headache and body aches. What do? You probably reach for a painkiller, maybe drink an extra cup of tea, and carry on with your day. You don't think about viruses, you don't call a doctor, you assume it's nothing. And 9 times out of 10, it is nothing, but that 10th time, that could be the beginning of one of the most rapidly progressing infections your body will ever face. The cruel design of hantavirus is that its early symptoms are almost perfectly engineered to be ignored. It mimics the common flu so closely that even experienced doctors have missed it in the early stages, and by the time the real danger reveals itself, the sudden, catastrophic lung failure, the window for intervention has already started closing. So how does this happen? Why do so many people miss it? And what does this virus actually do inside your body? Let's break it down. Hantavirus is not new. It was formally identified in the early 1990s after a mysterious outbreak in the southwestern United States, in a region known as the Four Corners, where the states of New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona meet. Healthy young people, some of them athletes, were suddenly dying of respiratory failure. Nobody could explain it. It felt like something out of a thriller novel. Eventually, scientists traced the source to a small creature most people barely think about: the deer mouse. Here's how transmission works, and this is important to understand. Hantavirus does not spread from person to person the way most viruses do. You cannot catch it by shaking hands with an infected person. You cannot catch it through a sneeze on the subway. The virus lives in rodents, primarily deer mice in North America, and it passes to humans through a very specific route. When infected rodents urinate, defecate, or shed saliva, the virus becomes airborne in tiny, microscopic particles. When you breathe in those particles, even once, even briefly, the virus can enter your respiratory system. This is called aerosolization, and it's the key to understanding why so many people get infected without ever realizing they were at risk. You don't have to touch a mouse. You don't have to get bitten. You just have to be in a space where infected rodents have been active and breathe the wrong air. Old cabins, barns, garden sheds, storage units, garages that have been closed for winter, even hiking trails where rodent populations are high. These are all potential exposure sites. And now here is the psychological trap that makes hantavirus so dangerous. After you're exposed, nothing happens for a while. The incubation period, the time between exposure and symptoms, is typically 1 to 5 weeks. That gap is long enough for you to completely forget that you were ever near a dusty old shed or a trail through deer mouse country. When the first symptoms finally appear, you have absolutely no reason to connect them to that weekend cabin trip 3 weeks ago. Your brain doesn't make that link. Why would it? The early symptoms are a low fever, muscle aches, particularly in the large muscles like the back, hips, and thighs, fatigue, and sometimes headache. Some people report stomach upset. It feels In every meaningful way, like the flu, this stage lasts about 3 to 5 days, and this is the most important window that almost everyone wastes, because inside your body, the virus is not resting. It's quietly attacking the walls of your blood vessels. Specifically, it's damaging the tiny capillaries in your lungs, and when those capillary walls start breaking down, fluid leaks into the lung tissue slowly at first, then faster, then comes what doctors call the cardiopulmonary phase, and this is where the situation turns life-threatening within hours. Your lungs fill with fluid, your blood pressure drops, your heart struggles. Patients can go from mildly unwell to on a ventilator in less than 24 hours. The mortality rate for hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which is what this form of the disease is called, sits somewhere around 35 to 38%. That means roughly 1 in 3 people who develop the serious stage of this infection will die from it, and the majority of them had days to seek help and didn't, because nothing in those early symptoms told them they were in danger. Here's the deeper truth about why humans consistently miss early warning signs of dangerous diseases, and it's not stupidity or carelessness, it's actually how our brains are built. Psychologists call it normalcy bias. It's the tendency of the human mind to interpret new and potentially threatening information through the lens of past, familiar experiences. When you feel mild flu-like symptoms, your brain immediately pulls up every other time in your life you felt that way, and the conclusion every other time was, "This will pass." That past pattern is overwhelmingly powerful. It drowns out the possibility of something new, something different, something dangerous. This is why normalcy bias kills people during disasters, during disease outbreaks, and in exactly this kind of situation. The signal is there, but our brain rewrites it as noise. There's another layer to this with hantavirus specifically because the disease is rare. Most people have never heard of anyone in their personal circle who got it, and we tend to assess risk based on the people around us. If nobody you know has ever had hantavirus, your brain assumes the risk is essentially zero. This is called availability bias. We judge probability based on how easily we can recall examples. Flu examples are everywhere, hantavirus examples are not, so the brain defaults to the most available explanation. This is just the flu. These two cognitive biases working together create a near-perfect storm of inaction during exactly the days when action could save your life. There's also a behavioral pattern worth noting. In many documented hantavirus cases, patients visited a doctor during the early phase, and here's where it gets sobering. They were often sent home with a diagnosis of flu or viral illness. Not because the doctors were negligent, but because, in those early days, the symptoms are genuinely indistinguishable from dozens of other conditions, unless the patient mentions a specific exposure history, and most patients don't mention it, because most patients don't remember it, or don't think it's relevant. The single detail that changes everything. I was cleaning out an old rodent-infested space recently, often never gets spoken, and without that detail, the doctor has no reason to order the specific tests that would catch hantavirus in time. So what do you actually do with this information? The first and most powerful thing is awareness of exposure risk. Certain activities dramatically increase your chances of coming into contact with hantavirus. Cleaning out closed, dusty spaces, especially rural or semi-rural structures that rodents might have accessed. Working in or around areas with visible rodent droppings or nesting material. Camping or hiking in areas with high deer mouse populations, particularly in Western North America, parts of South America, and certain regions of Asia and Europe. If you're going to work in any space like this, a storage shed, an old barn, a cabin that's been closed up, take precautions, ventilate the space first before you enter, don't sweep dry droppings, the sweeping aerosolizes the particles. Wet them down with a bleach solution first, wear an N95 respirator, not just a cloth mask, wear gloves, dispose of contaminated material carefully. These steps are genuinely protective. The virus doesn't survive well outside a host, and simple precautions break the exposure chain. The second thing, and this is critical, is that if you have had any recent exposure to rodent-infested spaces and you develop flu-like symptoms, in the weeks that follow, you need to tell a medical professional exactly that. Don't assume it's a coincidence. Say the words, I was recently in a space that may have had rodents. That single sentence changes the entire diagnostic picture. Early recognition and early supportive care, including intensive care hospitalization when the disease progresses, dramatically improves outcomes. There's no specific antiviral drug for hantavirus, but catching it before the cardiopulmonary crash gives doctors time to prepare and support your body through the most dangerous phase. The third thing is simply this: trust your instincts when something feels different. Most of us know what our normal flu feels like. If something about this